Friends, I want to ask you something that changed my life. When was the last time you made a decision only because you truly wanted it, not because someone else expected it from you? Think about it for a second. Most people spend their entire lives obeying invisible rules. They obey society. They obey family expectations. They obey friends. They obey trends. They obey opinions. And the sad part is they don't even realize they're doing it. I remember a time in my life when I believed that saying yes to everyone made me a good person. I thought being available all the time was kindness. I thought sacrificing my own happiness for others would make people appreciate me. But the more I obeyed, the more I lost myself. I was afraid of disappointing people. I was afraid of saying no. I was afraid of being misunderstood. So I kept agreeing with things I hated. I kept smiling when I was exhausted. I kept pretending everything was okay while silently carrying frustration inside me. And one day I realized something painful. I had become a stranger to myself. I knew what everyone else wanted from me, but I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Friends, maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe you say yes when you want to say no. Maybe you stay silent because you're afraid of conflict. Maybe you spend hours worrying about what people think of you. Maybe you've spent years trying to make everyone happy, only to discover that no matter how much you give, some people will still criticize you. And that's when I discovered something powerful through Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that we suffer more from our imagination and from the opinions of others than from reality itself. And honestly, that sentence felt like someone describing my entire life. I realized that I wasn't free. I wasn't living according to my values. I was living according to everybody else's expectations. Friends, if you want peace, confidence, and true self-respect, there comes a time when you must stop obeying everyone. Not because you hate people, but because you finally start respecting yourself. How I became a prisoner of other people's opinions. Friends, I want to share something personal with you, because I know many people secretly struggle with this. There was a time when I couldn't make a simple decision without thinking about what others would say. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then, their opinions felt more important than my own feelings. I would change my plans because someone disagreed with them. I would avoid saying what I truly believed because I didn't want to upset anyone. I would sacrifice my time, my energy, and sometimes even my happiness just to keep everybody comfortable. And honestly, I thought this was maturity. I thought I was being kind. I thought I was doing the right thing. But deep inside, something was slowly dying. I remember feeling exhausted all the time, and I couldn't understand why. Physically, I wasn't tired. Mentally, I was exhausted because I was carrying everyone's expectations on my shoulders. I wanted people to like me. I wanted approval. I wanted everyone to think I was a good person. So I kept saying yes. Yes to things I didn't want to do. Yes to responsibilities that weren't mine. Yes to people who only remembered me when they needed something. And every time I ignored myself to please someone else, a small part of me became weaker. The strange thing about seeking approval is that it never ends. You think that once you satisfy one person, you'll finally feel accepted. But then another person appears with new expectations. You satisfy them, and then someone else has another opinion. It's like trying to fill a bucket with holes. No matter how much effort you put in, you'll never feel complete because you're depending on something outside yourself. And that's exactly what the Stoics warned against. Epictetus said something that completely changed the way I look at life. He said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. At first, I didn't understand what he meant. But then I realized something incredible. He wasn't saying that we should become foolish. He was saying that freedom begins when we stop needing everybody's approval. Because if your happiness depends on what others think of you, then you're not free. You're their prisoner. And I think many people watching this know that feeling. You want to wear something, but you're afraid of judgment. You want to start a business, but you're afraid of criticism. You want to leave a toxic relationship, but you're afraid of what people will say. You want to pursue your dreams, but you're afraid of disappointing someone. So you stay stuck, not because you're incapable, but because you're obedient. Friends, I used to believe that if I was nice enough, kind enough, and helpful enough, everyone would appreciate me. But life taught me a different lesson. Some people don't respect unlimited kindness. They exploit it. Some people don't admire your sacrifices. They expect them. The more available you become, the more they assume you'll always be there. And before you realize it, you've trained people to value your usefulness instead of your presence. I learned this lesson in painful ways. There were moments when I dropped everything to help people who wouldn't do the same for me. I sacrificed my priorities because I didn't want anyone to think badly of me. And what did I receive? Not gratitude, not appreciation, just more expectations. People began treating my kindness as something normal. They expected me to always say yes. They expected me to always understand. And whenever I tried to prioritize myself, suddenly I became selfish in their eyes. That experience hurt me, but it also taught me something powerful. The people who benefit from your lack of boundaries are often the first people who complain. When you create them, think about that. The moment you stop obeying, some people become uncomfortable. Not because you're wrong, but because they're losing control over you. Marcus Aurelius faced criticism every day. He was the emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men in history. Yet he constantly reminded himself that other people's opinions were beyond his control. He understood something that many of us forget. You can spend your entire life trying to satisfy people, and some of them will still dislike you. So why sacrifice your peace for something you can never control? Friends, one day I asked myself a question that honestly changed everything. I asked myself, if I continue living this way for the next 10 years, will I be proud of myself? And the answer terrified me. No. Because I wasn't living my life. I was living everybody else's expectations. I was making decisions based on fear instead of purpose. I was avoiding criticism instead of pursuing growth. And I realized that if I didn't change, I would wake up one day filled with regrets. That's when I understood something Marcus Aurelius practiced every day. He didn't wake up asking, how can I make everyone happy? He woke up asking, how can I live according to virtue and reason? Friends, there's a huge difference between those two questions. One makes you a servant, the other makes you free. And maybe that's the problem many of us have. We spend so much time trying to avoid disappointing others that we end up disappointing ourselves. We betray our dreams. We ignore our instincts. We suppress our emotions. We stay silent when we should speak. We stay where we're unhappy because leaving might upset someone. And slowly, year after year, we become strangers to ourselves. But here's what I want you to remember, friends. Being kind doesn't mean being obedient. Being respectful doesn't mean sacrificing your identity. And being a good person doesn't mean saying yes to everything. The Stoics never taught blind obedience. They taught self-mastery. They taught courage. They taught us to value character over approval. And the truth is, nobody is coming to rescue you from a life that you keep choosing. Nobody can give you permission to become yourself. That permission has to come from you. Because one day when you're old and looking back on your life, you won't regret the criticism you received. You'll regret the dreams you abandoned because you were afraid of what people might think. And friends, that was the moment I began to understand something that changed my entire life. The greatest prison in the world isn't made of iron bars. It's made of fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of criticism. Fear of disappointing others. And until you break free from that prison, you will never experience true peace. Why people want you to obey and how society trains you to become a people pleaser. Friends, after realizing that I had become a prisoner of other people's opinions, I expected life to become easier. I thought that once I understood the problem, everything would suddenly change. But I was wrong, because understanding the problem and escaping it are two completely different things. And what I discovered shocked me. I realized that many people around us don't actually want us to become free. They want us to remain convenient. They don't always do this out of evil intentions. Sometimes they don't even know they're doing it. But human beings naturally become comfortable when others obey them. They become attached to the version of you that says yes to everything, that never argues, that never creates boundaries, and that always sacrifices itself for the happiness of others. I remember when I started changing. Nothing dramatic. I simply started saying no to things that drained me. I stopped answering every call immediately. I stopped apologizing for having priorities. I stopped explaining every decision I made, and strangely, some people didn't like it. They said, "You've changed." They said, "You used to be different." They acted as if I had become selfish. And honestly, those words hurt me. Because I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was just trying to stop hurting myself. But that's when I understood something powerful. People who benefited from my lack of boundaries mistook my self-respect for selfishness. Friends, society itself teaches us obedience from a very young age. Think about it. We are rewarded for fitting in. We are praised when we don't question things. We are taught to avoid disappointing people. We learn that being accepted is safer than being authentic. And slowly, without realizing it, we develop a dangerous habit. We begin measuring our worth through other people's approval. We stop asking ourselves what we truly want. And we start asking what others expect from us. We become experts at making everybody comfortable while becoming strangers to ourselves. Seneca once said that slavery comes in many forms, and perhaps the worst slavery is being a slave to public opinion. And when I first read those words, I felt uncomfortable because I realized he was describing me. I wasn't physically trapped. Nobody forced me to obey. But mentally, I had surrendered my freedom. I had allowed fear to become my master. fear of criticism, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood. And those fears controlled almost every decision I made. Friends, have you ever noticed something strange? People often encourage you to stay exactly where you are, especially if your growth makes them uncomfortable. If you're lazy like them, they feel comfortable. If you're afraid like them, they feel safe. But the moment you begin changing, the moment you start chasing bigger goals, improving yourself, or protecting your peace, suddenly they become critics. Not because you're wrong, but because your growth reminds them of the excuses they've been making for years. I remember wanting to improve myself, and some people laughed. I remember wanting to become disciplined, and some people said I was taking life too seriously. I remember wanting peace, and people accused me of becoming distant. At first, I thought they were right. I thought maybe I was changing too much. But then I realized something. Growth always feels like betrayal to people who are comfortable with the old version of you. Marcus Aurelius understood this perfectly. Every day he reminded himself that he would meet ungrateful, selfish, jealous, and ignorant people. Not because humanity is evil, but because human nature is imperfect. He accepted this reality instead of being surprised by it. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes many of us make. We expect everyone to support our growth. We expect understanding from people who are still fighting their own insecurities. We expect approval from people who don't even approve of themselves. Friends, here's something I wish someone had told me earlier. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Just because someone has a voice doesn't mean they have wisdom. Just because someone criticizes you doesn't mean they're right. And just because someone disagrees with your choices doesn't mean you should abandon your dreams. I spent years worrying about people who weren't even happy with their own lives. I allowed insecure people to influence my confidence. I allowed negative people to shape my decisions. And honestly, that's one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made. One day, I asked myself a question that changed my perspective completely. I asked, would I trade my life for theirs? And if the answer was no, then why was I giving their opinions so much power? Why was I allowing people who weren't living the life I wanted to dictate how I should live mine? Friends, that's madness. Imagine asking someone for directions when they're lost themselves. Yet that's exactly what many people do. They take life advice from unhappy people. They seek approval from people who don't respect themselves. And then they wonder why they feel confused. Epictetus taught that if someone can make you angry, upset, or afraid with their opinions, then they control you. Think about that. If a stranger's criticism destroys your confidence, then you've handed them authority over your mind. And friends, your mind is too precious to be controlled by random opinions. The truth is, not everybody deserves access to your thoughts. Not everybody deserves influence over your decisions. Some people deserve kindness but not obedience. Some people deserve respect but not authority. And that's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. I used to explain everything. Every decision. Every dream. Every change. I wanted everyone to understand me. But eventually I realized something beautiful. You don't need universal understanding to live a meaningful life. Some people will misunderstand you no matter how clearly you explain yourself. Some people have already decided who you are, and no amount of explanations will change their minds. And honestly, that's okay. Friends, one of the most peaceful moments in life is when you stop trying to convince everybody. When you stop needing everyone to agree with you. When you stop asking for permission to become who you were meant to be. Because the truth is, people will judge you no matter what. If you're successful, they'll criticize you. If you're struggling, they'll criticize you. If you're quiet, they'll criticize you. If you're confident, they'll criticize you. So if criticism is unavoidable, why not live according to your values instead of their expectations? Seneca once said that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And how true that is. Most of the fears that controlled me were imaginary. I feared rejection that never happened. I feared criticism that didn't matter. I feared disappointing people who eventually forgot about me anyway. And while I was busy worrying about opinions, life was passing by. Friends, life is too short to spend it performing for an audience that changes every day. Trends change. Opinions change. People change. But your character, your peace, and your purpose must remain stronger than all of them. Because if you build your life on other people's approval, you'll spend your entire life chasing something that can disappear overnight. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. The goal of life isn't to be liked by everyone. The goal is to respect yourself when you're alone. Because applause fades, approval fades, popularity fades. But the relationship you have with yourself will follow you until your last breath. And friends, once I understood this truth, I began discovering something even more powerful. I began learning the Stoic art of saying no without guilt, protecting my peace without becoming cold, and choosing myself without feeling selfish. The Stoic art of disobeying peacefully and reclaiming your freedom. Friends, after years of trying to please everyone, after carrying the weight of other people's expectations, and after slowly realizing how much of myself I had sacrificed, I finally reached a point where I was tired. Not physically tired, but emotionally exhausted. I was tired of pretending, tired of explaining myself, tired of seeking approval from people who didn't even understand me. And honestly, I thought becoming free would require some huge transformation. I thought I had to become cold, ruthless, or stop caring about people. But Stoicism taught me something very different. Freedom doesn't come from hating people. Freedom comes from no longer depending on them for your peace. I remember one day when I said no to something I didn't want to do. It wasn't a big decision. In fact, it was something very simple. But for me, it felt terrifying. I expected people to become angry. I expected criticism. I expected rejection. But something surprising happened. The world didn't end. Life continued. And that moment taught me something powerful. Most of the fears in my mind were much bigger than reality itself. I had spent years imagining disasters that never happened. Friends, many of us are not afraid of saying no because it's wrong. We are afraid because we've become addicted to being needed. We enjoy feeling important. We enjoy feeling useful. And sometimes, without realizing it, we confuse being loved with being needed. But they are not the same thing. Someone can need you without respecting you. Someone can use your kindness without appreciating your presence. And the truth is, if your value only comes from what you provide to others, then people will miss your service, not your soul. Marcus Aurelius never tried to control people's opinions. He focused on controlling himself. That's why he remained calm despite criticism, betrayal, and challenges. He understood something that changed my life. We don't control what people think, but we control how we respond. We don't control who stays in our lives, but we control who gets access to our peace. And we don't control the behavior of others, but we always control our character. Friends, one of the greatest changes I made was stopping the habit of explaining everything. I used to justify every decision. If I wanted rest, I explained it. If I wanted peace, I explained it. If I wanted to focus on myself, I explained it. I thought everyone deserved an explanation. But eventually, I realized that mature people respect your decisions, and immature people won't understand them no matter how much you explain. So why waste your energy trying to convince people who have already decided not to understand you? I started protecting my peace. I stopped responding to every argument. I stopped proving myself to people who misunderstood me. I stopped chasing relationships that only survived because I constantly sacrificed myself. And yes, some people left. Some people became distant. Some people accused me of changing. But here's what I discovered. Losing people who only loved your obedience isn't a loss. It's freedom. Friends, life becomes beautiful when you stop carrying everyone else's emotions. You are not responsible for making everyone happy. You are not responsible for fixing everybody's problems. You are not responsible for constantly sacrificing yourself so others can remain comfortable. Because if you spend your life saving everyone, eventually nobody will save you from yourself. Epictetus said that no man is free who is not master of himself, and mastery begins with small decisions. Saying no when necessary, walking away from disrespect, protecting your energy, prioritizing your peace, choosing growth over approval. These things may seem small, but together they create something priceless. They create self-respect. And friends, here's something I learned through painful experiences. Not everyone will clap when you become stronger. Some people preferred the old version of you because that version was easier to control. They liked the version that apologized for everything. They liked the version that tolerated disrespect. They liked the version that abandoned itself to make everyone comfortable. But growth is uncomfortable, especially for people who benefited from your weakness. I remember feeling guilty whenever I prioritized myself. I thought self-care was selfish. I thought boundaries were rude. But over time I understood that even nature has boundaries. The ocean doesn't apologize for its waves. The sun doesn't apologize for setting. Trees don't apologize for shedding their leaves. Why then do humans apologize for protecting their peace? Friends, your kindness should never require self-destruction. Your love should never demand self-abandonment. And your loyalty should never cost you your identity. Because at the end of the day, you only have one life, one mind, one soul. And if you constantly give pieces of yourself away to satisfy everyone, eventually there will be nothing left for you. One day I asked myself a question that changed everything. If I continue obeying everyone, who will obey my dreams? If I continue prioritizing everyone else's happiness, who will protect mine? And honestly, the answer was painful. Nobody. Nobody was coming to rescue me. Nobody was going to live my life for me. Nobody was going to carry my regrets. That responsibility belonged to me, friends. That's when I truly understood Stoicism. It's not about becoming emotionless. It's not about rejecting people. It's about understanding what deserves your energy and what doesn't. It's about choosing wisdom over approval. It's about becoming your own source of peace instead of searching for it in other people's opinions. And maybe that's the lesson you've needed to hear today. You don't need permission to become yourself. You don't need approval to chase your dreams. You don't need everybody's understanding to live a meaningful life. Because people will always talk. They talked yesterday, they'll talk today, and they'll talk tomorrow. But their opinions won't carry your regrets. You will, friends. If there's one lesson I wish someone had taught me earlier, it's this. You don't owe the world your obedience. You owe yourself honesty. You owe yourself courage. And above all, you owe yourself the chance to become who you were meant to be. Spent years believing that being a good person meant making everybody happy. I thought sacrificing myself would earn love. I thought saying yes to everything would create peace. But all it created was exhaustion. And maybe you've experienced the same thing. Maybe you've spent years trying to fit into expectations that were never yours. Maybe you've been afraid to disappoint people. Maybe you've ignored your dreams because someone else disagreed with them. If that's you, then I want you to understand something. Your life is too precious to be controlled by opinions. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that the opinion of 10,000 men means nothing if they know nothing about the subject. Friends, people will judge you no matter what. If you fail, they'll talk. If you succeed, they'll talk. If you stay quiet, they'll talk. If you speak confidently, they'll talk. So don't build your life around applause because applause is temporary. Build your life around character because character remains when everything else disappears. Remember this. Saying no doesn't make you selfish. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel. Choosing your peace doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you responsible. And responsibility is one of the greatest forms of freedom. Because one day, many years from now, you won't remember every criticism. You won't remember every opinion, but you'll remember whether you had the courage to live your own life or whether you spent your years performing for an audience that eventually forgot your name. So friends, stop obeying everyone. Stop asking permission to become yourself. Respect people, love people, be kind to people, but never abandon yourself for people. Because true freedom begins the moment you stop living for approval and start living according to your values. And always remember this. Friends, you were not born to be controlled. You were not born to spend your life making everybody comfortable while abandoning yourself. You were born to live with courage. You were born to live with wisdom. You were born to live with dignity. And perhaps today is the day you stop obeying everyone and finally start obeying your own soul. And if you found value in this video, make sure to hit the like button because it helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to StoicPower and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another journey into Stoicism, philosophy, and self-mastery. And tell me in the comments, what is one thing you are going to stop obeying from today? I read your comments, and I love hearing your thoughts and experiences.